You are listening to I Am Interchange.
I am interchange.
I am interchange.
I am Interchange.
Fostering curiosity, education, and empathy by exploring the controversial and the provocative.
I am interchange.
How does a nation reconcile a heinous history of colonialism, slavery, murder, rape, and thievery to itself, let alone the generations that have sprung forth from those it harmed? There are fair arguments for reparations. There are equally persuasive challenges to make the past just that, and to come together as a global community of differently colored, shaped, and sized Homo sapiens, stumbling through existence with good intentions, but a particular aptitude for making trouble. Humanity has, after all, a rather unadulterated history of exploration and colonization, regardless of origin, ethnicity, and religion. This isn't American-made. On the contrary, there are a host of social, political, ethnologic, economic, and sexist structures and constructs in place to ensure that this manner of degradation, exploitation, and annihilation of the other continues. How does humanity take down what was, address what is, and build anew? I'm Tate Chamberlain, and in this podcast, myself and a panel of esteemed guests, including landowner Billy McWilliams, Indigenous political activist Terry Bradley, Indigenous documentary filmmaker Ivy McDonald, and libertarian entrepreneur Kyle Mack, discuss America's legacy of oppression and genocide, globalization versus tribalism, reconciliation, perspective, and the work needed to ensure a collective future that does not repeat the past. Hey, Ivy.
Hey.
Good to see you.
Yeah.
Hey, Billy.
Hey.
Hey, Terry.
Hello.
How's it going?
It's going.
Hey, Kyle.
How's it going, man? Long time no see.
Caught you drinking a tall glass of water.
Yep.
What almost kept you from being here today?
The idea of being in a small space.
Definitely.
The idea of doing two of these back to back.
The idea of doing two of these back to back. So being in a small space almost kept you?
Yeah, I have a partner who has immune compromisation, and I take COVID really seriously, and I'm not going to mess around. I appreciate the things that you have done.
Mm-hmm.
How about you, Terry? What almost kept you from being here?
Tiredness. I just got done with the busiest week of my entire year, and I almost just slept.
What's so busy?
I work for a nonprofit, and I'm the development manager. So we have an election appeal out, a lot of fundraising that going on. I ended up pulling 14 hours days Tuesday and Wednesday, and then a 12-hour day on Thursday. Yeah.
Here you are. Look at you. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, of course.
You. How did y'all earn your first $1?
Mowing lawns.
Mowing lawns?
I worked in a restaurant when I was 13. It was under the table for someone I knew.
Restaurant under the table?
I had a little store outside of that I sold stuff inside my house. And I embezzled the money and then didn't pay my sister, who was my coworker, and didn't buy any supplies. And so my parents told me no more.
You had a business. You had a business out of your house.
Yeah, I sold I sold popsicles and ice cream, and my parents bought all this stuff for me, and then I ended up embezzling all the money and then not buying any more supplies with it.
So you're an entrepreneur.
Yeah. Definitely.
That's exactly what, most of us do now.
Yeah.
Get free stuff and sell it.
Yeah.
Definitely. I think my big kid job first was good old McDonald's.
McDonald's?
Yeah.
You already answered, sorry.
Yep.
McDonald's.
Loved it. It was my favorite job.
Mine was between the Tooth Fairy and a lemonade stand.
I guess the Tooth Fairy is probably my real first dollar.
Yeah.
I earned that really well.
Yeah, and lemonade stand for me.
Yeah. How do you use technology? In what ways do you use technology?
In every way possible, I think.
Yeah.
Every way possible?
Yeah.
It's I think my primary use is learning podcasts and entertainment. It's like probably my primary use.
For technology.
Yeah, for technology. It's what I use it primarily for every day.
Creating.
You use technology to create.
Yeah.
You too, Terry?
Mine's mostly connection.
Yeah.
You use
Connect
technology
with-
to connect.
Yeah,
Definitely.
everyone and everything.
Yeah.
Definitely. Family, friends, politics, business,
Everything.
everything. Learning for sure.
I'm hoping to hear about your family's history in the United States, and it might span back generations, but if you can compartmentalize it and describe your family's history in the United States.
I'm Blackfeet and part Shoshone. I'm part Scottish. So my family's, been here for hundreds of thousands of years. My grandpa, my dad's dad, was born on the boat over from Scotland. And so he got his birth certificate in Quebec when they got to shore. And then he just kind of migrated down and then met my dad's mom, who's full Blackfeet. And then my grandpa's half Blackfeet, half Shoshone.
Cool.
I grew up with a single mom, so my father's side I don't really know outside of DNA testing. But on my mom's side, both the German and the Scottish and Welsh side, they all settled or settled's probably not the right word, but they all showed up to North Dakota in like the 1890s, like somewhere around there, and kind of lived between North Dakota and Saskatchewan. So I got a lot of family that's Canadian. Most of my family is Canadian, and they all come from those roots.
My grandpa is full-blood Blackfeet, and my grandma was full Grovant. On my father's side, Blackfeet, my mother's side, Grovant, and we've been here since forever.
What's the relationship between the tribes?
Not much relationship at all. I mean, even now, like the Blackfeet is on the northeastern side of the state, and then Grovant is in Fort Belknap, which is more western side, north.
Do you identify more with the Grovant or the Blackfeet?
Yeah, I mostly identify more with the Grovant because I grew up on the Fort Belknap Indian Reservation, and that's where I'm enrolled in as well. But we used to spend like summers over on the Blackfeet Reservation in Browning and stay with my grandparents.
I'm getting old. I just turned 60. And so I did a DNA test and found that I'm pretty much British, Scottish, Irish, Western European in that order. And then I've been looking at my family tree, and my 10th great-grandfather is a guy named Augustine Warner. And he moved to Virginia in 1620s at 17. And when he was 29, he started a plantation in Virginia, 28 miles from 1619 landfall for slaves. So I'm a slaver, essentially. My great-great-great-grandfather, this is new to me, by the way, it's kind of freaking me out. Great-great-great-grandfather was named William McWilliams, my namesake, and in 1850, Mississippi, he was an overseer. So he's the guy who drove the slaves. And if you see it, you can see the migration. There's a great book by Ta-Nehisi Coates called Water Dancer. And what happens is that the Virginia fields got burnt up with use, and they kept going further and further south and further west. Ended up in Texas, where I was born.
So this event came about, it's kind of discussing tribalism and globalism, and then the reconciliation around that. Will you help me wrap my head around tribalism and globalism? What are some of the characteristics of each of them? Let's start with tribalism.
I think both of the terms often get very conflated with a lot of different things. So you kind of have to peel them back a little bit and try to unpack it a little bit. But tribalism, I think, usually stands with there's some sort of cultural values, cultural norms, like a kind of a group identity that bonds people together in some fashion, with whatever it be. It might be like a nationality, it might be your favorite sports team, it might be like your geographical location. But that's kind of what I think of when I think of tribalism.
It might be different with Native American.
And it might be.
Yeah, because if you think about it, I mean, you guys went over 13,000, 15,000 years ago over the land bridge and you've been here ever since. I mean, and you're really rooted in the place that you live. Your identity, that's different, I think.
Yeah, I mean, there's like a sense of connection to the land, I think, obviously being indigenous. You know, there's like a certain, especially with me being Blackfeet and going to the Blackfeet reservation, there's this feeling of, you know, when you get to a certain point, when you hit the border, sort of, it's like, oh, this is home, you know, this is my land, this is where our people are from, this is where we've always been.
You feel it, don't you?
Yeah, you definitely feel it. When I go out to my uncle's ranch in Badger Creek area, that's sort of like where I feel probably the most peaceful I feel in any space or anything like that. It's sort of just this connection to whatever is there, the energy, the land. There's so many like factors into it, and so it's definitely like a pool. And you know, even with COVID and stuff, it's been so hard. You know, during the summers I go to Browning all the time and I visit my grandma. All my family pretty much lives in Browning still, and it sucks that I wasn't able to go, and sort of I miss that home and that feeling and that connection, and I miss my reservation in my town and stuff.
So to you, tribalism is your connection to the land and kind of that energy that it brings you.
And connection to the people, you know, in Browning too, like, you know,
Yeah.
sort of like, it's funny, you can tell, natives can tell other natives apart, which is funny. You know, like I know who's like Blackfeet, I know, like, you know, there's like certain characteristics. And so it's sort of like that kind of like connection to where I see another Blackfeet persons, you know, in Missoula, you know,
Sure.
that's where I'm living. And I'm like,
you're
oh,
just
hey.
like, yeah, really?
Yeah, it's a thing. I don't know how to explain it, but it's,
You just know.
yeah.
Do you have anything to add, Terry?
Well, I think that I'd be hitting it right on the head is that historically and today, there's a difference between the definition of tribalism versus globalism and the application of those ideas. I think tribalism has been what I feel is a sense of belonging, and whether it's like in that nuanced way of like being in a Facebook page who all love a certain football team or have a certain passion for something. And I think that that more nuanced definition ignores the actual application or execution of tribalism, because tribes haven't gone away. We're still here. We still are integrated, and
not integrated.
yeah, we are forced to think globally when tribalism is looked at as something divisive or a you or me mentality, when in fact it's more about the respect of differences and respect of diversity. And she can be a part of a tribe. I can be a part of a tribe. We can recognize that difference and still have that connection and know that we are in this together. And I feel the application of globalization has been not to share wealth or ideas or progress, but to force upon a certain ideal or a certain mission, like manifest destiny, like reallocation, like all those things. And I think that's, for me, like, it's the philosophical aspect of it is like, yes, we can have globalization and tribalization, and like those two can exist. It's not one or the other. They're not exclusively existence. You can't have one without the other. So
I was talking to my friend Barb today, and she introduced me to this article in environmentalism. They don't include the Native American views of how to live and sustain the land. And those views have been systemically taken away. And, well, look where we are, right? So it's like that view is not even being included whatsoever because it's always been minimalized. It's interesting to think about, but how that actually works, I don't really know.
I think we got through tribalism, and then Terry, Terry kicked us into globalism, which is fine.
Yes.
And then Billy, can you reframe that to fit?
In other words,
like globalism.
Sure.
Like how does that apply? How do
when you talk about tribalism, you talk about a certain group of people with certain values who are connected to the place that they live in a real, tangible way. That being taken away with globalism, and saying that if we want a more sustainable world, we're going to have to include that kind of tribalism and thought that makes
Okay.
us more sustainable.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Globalism.
This is one of those things where I think globalism often gets conflated with a whole bunch of different ideas and just public discussion. When I think of globalism, like a positive view of globalism, I guess, is the idea of like free exchange of goods and services across the globe. So it's not necessarily like a disrupting force on tribalism, because it's like different tribes, different groups of people can freely exchange ideas and culture and products and all these things with each other. I think one of the negative views of globalism is something like what you were saying, where there's kind of this like forced imperialism aspect of it. And I think those are separate ideas, but I do find one's positive, one's negative, like the forced imperialism aspect of trying to get people to like change their cultures and try to like manipulate diversity and things like that. That's something that I would say I'm generally opposed to.
Do you have any thoughts on globalism, Ivy?
A lot.
A lot. Are there limits to either?
There's something I think important for globalism that not a lot of talk, and that's our shared humanity, our shared love and respect and appreciation. And that's a beautiful idea. And that picks up from tribalism and globalism. So when you talk about the fact that Black Lives Matter came up, and all of a sudden something that happened in Minneapolis suddenly went all the way around the world. So that's something beautiful.
It's interesting you bring like that up. You know, historically, indigenous people helped a lot of the colonizers, or tried to help a lot of the colonizers, who then in turn created this whole genocide against like their culture, their way of life, all of this stuff. And, you know, like smallpox,
Right.
the blanket, sort of this like idea, sort of we didn't learn from this, didn't learn from that horrible era, had another one. I always say you can't have indigenous rights without Black liberation too.
Well, for me, when Black Lives Matter was something that made me really realize my white male privilege. I'm lucky. Not realizing that, like, you get certain privileges because you're white. You get certain privileges because you're a male. And same with how old you are. People listen to you.
Do you feel that way, Kyle? Is there white privilege?
I think there's varying like degrees of privilege, no matter where you are, who you are. Certain people are born into better circumstances than others. And it might be things that have to do with gender, might have to be things that do with ethnicity, wealth, all of these things. We all kind of get what we are given. We have the cards that are dealt.
In some ways, I guess when you look at it, if you're a white person, you have 10 times the wealth at birth than a black person, and I'm certain Native American is right in there. So it's like, we're not starting at a level playing field. We're talking about systemic rules to create this wealth, and part of that is taking indigenous lands that we are sitting on right now and using them to develop economic value. Those were not equal for people of color. Now, not to say that like there isn't things for people, white people who are less fortunate, for sure. But
yeah, because you got things like, white trailer trash and things like that are,
sure,
as what people would call them.
We have to recognize that we systemically use black and brown people to create wealth.
I mean, that's the whole thing of slavery. It was, white wealth was built on the backs of blacks. Black people.
Well, yeah, and I'll say things like the drug war disproportionately hit minorities, flat out, and there were reasons behind those policies for implementing them back in the day.
Jim Crow.
Jim Crow laws, yeah. Like all these things all exist, but I also think that there's a lot more variables that go into it than just the systemic side. Like there's a whole, the world's complex. There's a lot of variables that go into this thing.
Is diversity good?
What other choice do we have?
When I think of tribalism and connection to the land and connection to the people closest to me, my own, I understand that there's probably diversity within that tribe, but is diversity in a globalistic way good?
I think for me, being indigenous, I think it's sort of just like a survival technique to live in like this kind of, westernized world. Like I was kind of telling you last night, this sort of idea of, when I go back to the res, I'm a totally different person compared to who I am in a white society. Even in Missoula, I'm totally different because I have to be, not totally different to a way that like I'm a different person, but there's certain things that I don't take off my reservation, sort of.
For example,
I grew up traditional Blackfeet, and so it's sort of this idea of there's certain things that I can't do, but trying to implement that into like a westernized world with like my friends who majority of them are white, and sort of this idea, it's sort of seen as like, I wouldn't necessarily say a joke, they take it seriously, but sort of it's different. I can't do certain things at night just because that's how I grew up. And that's...
Is that the traditional part of you that brings to the quote unquote more diverse life you live in Missoula?
Diversity, I think for me is just learning from different people. And so I think diversity is good for me in a sense of like being in a white society. Diversity is definitely good for me.
Do you feel more comfortable with those traditional things when you are?
Yeah, I feel more comfortable around natives for sure.
Really?
And just,
for sure.
It's definitely like, I was telling Tate yesterday, like you can walk into a room and sort of, if there's too many white people, I get nervous. And it's not because of this idea, it's like historical trauma type of thing. Like you walk in and you just like freeze up kind of, or you're like really trying to...
You're changing modes.
Yeah, you're changing modes. It's like, it's a different thing of like, even walking in here, it's sort of this like...
Takes a lot of energy.
Trying to be like, not defensive, but like, indigenous people think differently than white people. It's just, it's like this collective type of, I wouldn't even say mentality, but kind of mind thing. Like it's interesting.
Yeah, it's the code switching that we have to do in order to survive. Code switching is when you change the way you talk and the way you move and how you interact, and different cultural rules are in place. So then you have to switch and follow those different things.
Sure.
Like I said on Monday, like I told Tate that when I go back home, I don't speak the way I'm speaking to you right now. I learned how to speak clearly and not be the intimidating Indian because that distracted from me being a part of the community.
What would an intimidating Indian look and sound like?
I mean, I guess us, except in a different accent, like a res accent. Like you can tell the difference, because if you went into a room full of Native Americans or indigenous people, you would feel like you were witnessing an entirely different world. And it's the same as if we walked into, or I walked into a room full of white people. I have learned through trial and error, through, the slapping of the hands and telling me what I could and couldn't do. And so I learned how to survive. And that's why I am where I am, is like, I essentially had to learn the white man's way so that I wasn't deemed that, and that so that I could be successful in this white man's world, so that now I can go back and help my people.
Right.
And it's not, I think that, to go back to the original question of like, what does diversity mean? If you go to the Gathering of the Nations, or even the MSU powwow here, the MSU powwow is the largest diversity event in the state. Nevertheless, in Bozeman, it brings in hundreds of thousands of people, and it brings in millions of dollars. And no one wants to talk about that. But if you've ever been to the MSU powwow, or any other powwow here in the state or across the country, it's intertribal. And it's because we can understand that there are different tribes that are diverse in what they believe and how they conduct themselves and how they seek justice and everything. And
it sounds like they're getting more powerful.
Well, it's not. I don't think it's more powerful. I think we're refinding the power we once had, because we lost a lot of it because of globalization. And whether that's the exchange of goods and products, we once thought that Black people were goods and products. We built an entire economy around stolen land and stolen people. And that has been the outcome of globalization. And I think in modern day, tribalism has been the resilience aspect of those being oppressed, and globalization has been the oppression of those people applied to modern day society, whether that's governmental, politically, socially, educationally. And yeah, like the difference, like, I'm taking up a lot of airspace, but I think I think the difference is that it's not about one or the other. It's how do we reconcile with how we applied those things and how we're applying them now, and then either changing it or fixing it, or inevitably burning it all down to the ground and starting over.
Which is what we should do.
Yeah, and I think that's...
What does that look like?
Yeah, that's my question is, what does that look like, though?
What do you mean? What does it?
Burning it down.
Burning it all
Yeah,
down?
like, and then who dictates who gets what and all of these things?
Well, I think it's distributing power in a way that, you know, if you think about it, who are the two people running for president right now? Two old white guys, you know?
Yeah.
And so it's sort of this idea of, we had one black president, and then look what we got, 4 years of Trump.
Because
and
of
then,
that.
Yeah, and we had we had the Civil Rights Act, and then we had the war on drugs.
Right.
This is kind of like a thing. I listened to Sean King a lot, and he talks about the fact that you have this uprising of people who are trying to pretty much be equal in a white society, and yet there's always these like people who tear it all down in a matter of like voting or you know, always like it's always something with like the government. So it's sort of like you have these people who are standing up for themselves, and then you have this big historical type of thing that just tries to dismantle it as much as it can, and then you're going to have another uprising.
My fear is that we've had this moment of consciousness when you talk about Black Lives Matter, and everybody raised to do something, and then white people are going to say, yeah, that's a pretty good idea, but
all lives matter. You know, it's that,
or blue lives matter.
it's that ridiculous thing that it's always like
It's a minimizing.
white people are scared of having people of color in power.
They are.
Yeah.
They are.
What is manifest destiny? In a nutshell.
White devil's work.
It was essentially the justification of of genocide and claiming of land and people through the word of God. They used religion as a social, political.
It's no coincidence that
weapon.
the Bible Belt is in the South. If you're doing something horrible like enslaving people, you have to rationalize it. And rationalizing it, you get stronger religion. And that faith makes you feel like you're stronger, and you don't face the fact that you're enslaving and killing people.
So manifest destiny gave white U.S. culture and I guess European culture basically had God's blessing to conquer.
Yeah.
Kill the savage Indians.
Yeah, to globalize in God's word.
But this isn't also a thing that's purely uniquely American. This is something that has been the story of humanity for all of time. It's like I don't agree with manifest destiny, but this has been the historical norm, and I do think that we're getting at least somewhat past the manifest destiny model of things.
We have to recreate the myths that we come to believe.
What's the difference between manifest destiny and globalization?
I don't think there is.
Yeah, I don't think there's any difference.
There are few countries who have not been colonized. It's in the under 20, and that is colonization of European white people.
Right.
And if that is not globalization, I don't know what is. I don't think manifest destiny is like you said, essentially a U.S. thing. It's definitely a historical global thing because white people made it a historical global thing. Before that, before Columbus got lost, and we, as indigenous people, gave him shelter and food, and
he killed and raped.
Yeah, and that's how we got. And that was the exchange. Was we gave them claim to a space that we didn't have to, and we did because we had humanity. And I think the difference is humanity was not reciprocated because instead they used, and whether it was accidentally or intentionally more down the road, but bringing disease, bringing religion, bringing these Western ideals of save the child and kill the Indian is like scalping, like devastating the buffalo herds. It was intentional. There were choices made every step of the way. I think America's on a staircase to get where it needs to be in reconciling and seeking justice, and we are miles of steps below where it should be. There's this whole thing about America has been the greatest country in the whole wide world. I think it has the potential to be the greatest country, and the movement of civil rights or Black Lives Matter or missing and murdered Indigenous women are all steps to get where we could be the greatest one. And we are still reconciling.
Appreciate your good grace.
Yeah. Sorry. And I think we're still figuring out how we get to the next step so that we can get where we should be, or that where we think it currently is. Because for some people, it has been great. Good for you. For my people, and whether hundreds of years ago or today, it hasn't been so great.
I think when South Africa ended apartheid, they had the Truth and Reconciliation Committee. Now, it's not completely analogous because these were the specific people who did the specific things, but there was a conversation from the people who did oppress it and then the oppressed, and they worked on it. I see nothing in America formally that says we did this. What does it look like to move further? I think probably start with actually following through with the treaties that we signed with sovereign nations.
Yeah, I think there hasn't been reconciliation or recognition that we've done something because we're still doing it.
Right.
I go about life calling white people colonizers because they are currently still colonizing in the present tense land that they claimed was owned by Indigenous people, and that's why it's leased through a treaty. You are in a governmental document agreement that you are temporarily owners of this land. And in order to keep that ownership, you said, we'll pay you this much money. None of that money has ever been paid. And we are still owners and stewards of this land. We haven't colonized America or the United States. Colonization is still happening.
Right.
What does it mean to reconcile with someone?
I think reconciliation is to work through and not compromise, but come back to that good feeling of fostering and maintaining a relationship with someone. Whether it's like reconciling with my abusive alcoholic father through what happened, or whether it's reconciling with someone who throws a derogatory term down my way on the street, or reconciling through policy and law, is getting back to, we're not seeking justice or equity, but where justice and equity are a default feeling, like that feeling of, like Ivy described, feeling home, and you can feel it, and you can relax, and you don't have to put up a wall or adorn armor in order just to survive an exchange.
This is going to be really hard. It's going to be really hard. 'Cause from what I'm getting from what you're saying is that you really have a sense of place. You really have a sense of identity. You literally have a tribe, and you love it, and you want to keep it and foster it. And on the other hand, you've got generational trauma on top of global economic forces and that fight against the very thing that you're trying to maintain. And we're somewhere in between. I don't know.
Can there be forgiveness without acknowledgement. A lot of people still celebrate Columbus Day and Thanksgiving, and
If 10 years ago somebody would say Columbus Day, the vast majority of people, including me, would probably just take it as like, oh yeah, Columbus.
yeah.
So it's not like, this is pretty new to our consciousness.
Yeah, like I don't really think Columbus Day is something that's at the forefront of a lot of people's minds. I don't really celebrate much holidays, to be completely honest. I didn't even realize until Tate called me to be part of this panel that it was Columbus Day. Like, it just wasn't something that was at the forefront of my mind.
So,
Do
okay,
you think it's because you're white? Like, not in like a mean way, but like, you know, for indigenous people, like for it to be called Indigenous Peoples Day, it's a big thing. And a lot of indigenous people have fought to have it be recognized, especially in like Montana and certain places. And, you know, that's the sad reality, is that I always say for indigenous people, we always have to create our own justice because no one else is going to give it to us. Like, we always have to fully be all in. And, you know, even with like saying something as Columbus Day, like I always knew because of my parents that it was such a, you know, I always knew the real story of Columbus and sort of what happened. And so like even saying Columbus Day, it like sends shivers down my spine kind of, you know, it's like this thing of like, it's such a huge push and such a huge thing for indigenous people to have ownership over that again. Obviously, it's not important to a lot of people, but like for indigenous people, it's definitely like a big, you know, thing.
The origin of Columbus Day was...
Mattress sales?
It's funny how we got there, huh?
Crazy.
In the 20s with the Italian American community, but it's definitely a product of Jim Crow and xenophobia and white nationalism. So this was not something, if you would have said 150 years ago, say around the Civil War, Columbus Day, they wouldn't comprehend of it. This was a construct that we did that was specifically racist and nationalist.
For me personally, like I find, and it's not just Columbus Day, it's just like a lot of these holidays and making certain days, these specific days, I find them to be kind of just bland symbolism that whether it's a whatever holiday, it doesn't have to be this holiday specifically, I don't get too attached to these days. And it's kind of a strange thing in my brain to think that people are attached to these. It's not my personal lived experience to feel like I need to care about which day it is, I guess if that makes sense.
Terry, when we talked, you weren't attached. I mean, I think you were attached, but there was more to it than just naming a day.
Yeah, for me, it's like another step in the right direction. The reclaiming of a historical moment in time was Columbus Day is celebrating while Columbus was the catalyst for genocide. Like, and
He actually did it too.
yeah, I get where like holidays don't seem that important or whatnot, but we need to realize its impact socially is to convince people that America was built on in this romantic way from this person who was lost on a boat and found these poor savages who didn't know civilization. And it's the furthering of that narrative, because once we have the basics of a holiday where some people don't have to care about it or don't see the importance of it, has an actual impact and a role to play in the gears of white supremacy and colonization. Yes, it's not a big deal because it's just a holiday. And we need to realize its application in the society is much bigger than that. It's the same deal as reducing the history of slavery to one chapter in a history book, or implementing gerrymandering into the election process. To most people, oh, it doesn't matter, I'm still voting, I'm still a part of the process, or my history is still told in this textbook. And we have intentionally chosen to reduce the importance or the actual reality of what we did in order to get where we are and where we're going and what we're maintaining.
Also, because like there's this idea that yes, the American government has been committing genocide, and I agree. I believe all governments are committing genocide. Like this is like the norm for governments. Like what are wars but mass murder campaigns, right? And it's like, that is something that has been the historical norm across all governments throughout all of history. And I don't know how far we can go back to try to reconcile past genocides of wars and things that governments did that I mean, none of us were a part of. None of us did any of these things that these terrible, like mafia-like entities called governments are doing to people.
Well, I think that there's something to be said about working for the future and not the past. But I do recognize my life is easy. I have just discussing being on the reservation and off the reservation, having two different things. That's a lot of energy. And I think there's something to be said for generational trauma. You don't kill 90% of the people and then destroy a complete way to live and not have successive trauma. And when you look at the levels of suicide and drug use and alcoholism on the reservation, those are all structural. But also, like, understand this. I think that this is the important thing for me is, like, this harms me. This has harmed me because I never recognized this and I've never adjusted to it. So the question is like, what can I do to reconcile that? Because let me tell you, the fact that I live on Native American land that one of my forebears, quote unquote, discovered, and now I have a good way, that makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable. And I think you're right in the sense of, like, it's always happened, it's going to continue to happen. The question to me is like, how do we address the structural things we have that have led to that? And also, like, get a new appreciation from what Native American cultures can bring in terms of building a better society.
Because one of the fears I have would be the resentment that would build from current generations if there's these, like, there's vicious cycle that's just going to start occurring. It's just like, oh, now people are stealing from me. And it's like, oh, now people are stealing from me. Right. It's like, where do we end it?
I know. Most of my conservative friends, when they talk about reparations, it's very much a hot topic for them because they can see this. You know, so I was talking to one of my conservative friends, and he was like, where does it end? You start with black, and next thing you know, it's going to be women. Next thing you know, it's going to be Native American. I'm like, yeah.
Well, we could fractionalize everybody's oppression thousands of years all the way back and see how these traces of DNA and how far they could go. I don't know if going back generations is the way to go about this.
But
like,
I mean, that's kind of the sad reality,
now.
though, is like we still feel that today. Like historical trauma is a thing that you feel every single day of like, I can't go home and turn off being Native American. I feel this all the time. And it's like hard for me to be in a space. Like I don't know how to explain it. And it's sort of like, sort of understand what you're saying and stuff, but it's like feeling this to this day. You know, you can go back so long, but it's we're never gonna heal. Like we can heal, but it's always gonna be this thing.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily a reconciliation of just the past and that's it. Like I think it's a reconciliation of today's generation and future generations. And I say we're colonizing because colonization didn't stop when Native Americans got citizenship. It didn't stop when Black people got citizenship. Colonization is still happening, and it's not reconciling. It's recognizing what happened and how we got here, and it's reconciling with the people who are still experiencing the consequences of that.
What does that look like?
Loss of language, loss of cultural ways of life.
Part of what inspired this evening was going to progressive meetings, and a lot of times I've experienced someone acknowledging the stolen land that they're on before it starts. And a lot of this is kind of about taking those steps of acknowledgement. Is that enough? Is making this acknowledgement enough? What comes through your mind? Are you familiar with these? People acknowledging that they're on stolen land before like a meeting or presentation?
Yeah, vaguely familiar.
I've never seen that.
It's an issue I haven't paid a
I've
whole
never
lot of
seen a
attention to
progressive
it.
meeting, but I'm more mainstream Democrat. I suppose.
I've seen a lot. It happens a lot on campus, I think.
Really, that's a new thing.
It's been going on for a
Yeah.
while. It's just sort of like cool, but what are you going to do about it? You know,
Yeah.
it's sort of like this, like kind of me and Tate were talking last night about this like disingenuine type of like, oh, I'm going to acknowledge this, but okay, let's get on with the thing. You know, like
it's performative allyship is
Yeah.
what it is. Hey, we
Performative
feel
allyship.
guilty.
And that's kind of what I was getting at when I was talking about. I feel like a lot of these things are kind of bland symbolism. Like there's not a
Right.
whole lot
Like
of
a
actual
holiday.
action that's going on.
Yeah, and there-
it's
you've
like
got-
virtue signaling in a lot
Right.
of places for people.
Exactly.
Well, I think it's allyship is equated to those in power. You aren't an ally if you are the oppressed person. So the value of that holiday for Indigenous people is not performative; it's reclaiming, and for those in power, it is a performative. You are the white government is literally allowing us to rename that. I think we need to recognize that is that at the end of the day, we still don't have a lot of power. We don't. That's how it works in a country built in slavery and genocide is the cycle of power, privilege, and oppression. And the system allowed us to do that. The allies made it possible because allies were white people in power elected to make those new policies and law. Allyship is an action, not a land acknowledgement. You can't just say that. Instead of acknowledging that you've stolen the land, why don't you act on it and just give the land back?
Billy, I know I already asked you this in our one-on-one interview, but one of the reasons why I invited you to be on here was a post you made on social media celebrating the death of General Custer on the anniversary of the Little Bighorn.
Right.
And I thought, wait a minute, this guy is a landowner
Right.
celebrating something that was made available to him by someone like General Custer. Why did you celebrate his death?
Well, if you look at the history of General Custer, first, this is a pattern that he's done. In his quest for power, he did something earlier, the Sand Creek Massacre, where he would send military troops on one side, the warriors would attack the troops, and then he would go around and kill the women and children. And that's exactly what he did at Little Bighorn. So he was literally going to kill and annihilate entire tribes of women and children in a knowing way. And you know what? That's wrong. And he deserves to die. Am I a product of the land things that got us to this place? Yeah, I am. The question is, and this is really important, it's like, where do we get away from symbolic allyship into something that is tangible? That's what I'm interested in doing. Now, will I give away everything? Can't say that honestly, but I do.
What are property rights?
A white comfort.
Property rights are a white comfort.
Yeah. Before colonialism, ownership of land wasn't a concept. You didn't own property. You didn't own the land. We were stewards of it. We were responsible to take care of it, not to use it and abuse it and mine from it and completely disregard and pollute it. We understand the cycle of and where we fit in it was taking care of it and taking only what we needed and not exploiting it.
I mean, if you think about the Dawes Act in like 1887, you know, it was land that was subdivided up to like, you know, the heads of like different families for Native Americans, and they used it, you know, against them, saying like, if you didn't accept this, you won't be a U.S. citizen type of thing.
Was the Dawes Act was where they had the tribes mark their territory for the first time?
Yeah, and so like it was sort of that, and then the idea of like selling, say if like someone didn't want to sign anything like that, they wouldn't become a U.S. citizen, and all of the land that was implemented to these people, the land that wasn't signed was given away to non-natives. It was sold to non-natives, you know.
Okay.
Property is what you mix your labor with. It's, you know, you buy it with the fruits of your labor over, you know, from working or creating something. But this idea that native tribes didn't have any conception of property rights before white people came. I just don't see that as being true.
Well, that's not
Like,
what we were saying at all.
but-
There were stationary tribes who did agriculture. There was a concept of harvesting and plotting and all of that beforehand, and it depends on where in the United States you were. Of course, there were more migratory nations who adapted and followed certain herds and knew certain seasons of where to go and what to do. And the idea that we were all migratory and somehow nomadic is
that's not
is
true.
a silly
Yeah.
is a silly notion to entertain. Like that's not true. How would we have had taught settlers how to harvest corn and maize if there weren't people to
Who already
harvest
have it.
and harvest and plant maize in the first place? It's the concept, and I think that idea of like pan-Indianism is there were hundreds of thousands of different tribes who had different cultures. It was the outcome of different economies and all of it. They were all unique. That was the thing, is that tribalism let those things be unique. And I'm not trying to romanticize it either, of the fact that like there weren't wars or there weren't murders or genocide. Like, yeah. And we were on the forefront of intertribal knowledge, intertribal like economies and governments. I mean, the 13 Confederate Iroquois tribes were all very distinct, but they came together. And it's actually one of the formulas and kind of governmental structures adopted by the US. And even the idea of like forest management. Now, the federal level and throughout other states are looking at forest management processes and policies that were rooted in original indigenous forest management. And they think it's some new, like, revolutionary, innovative concept when it's literally adopted from indigenous people who are already managing it before colonialism, who are already working in, like, intertribally. And this notion of we were all separate, we were all doing the same thing, and that we're representing everyone is ridiculous to think about. Even here in Montana, I mean, there are now 8 reservations and 12 different nations who are forced to be in this land. And we are, like, the idea of these certain tribes to be forced to one location is the outcome of it, and we are still impacted by it. That's why we have to find comfort and solace in getting back over that res line.
Billy and Kyle, you're both landowners.
Yep.
Yes.
If there were a movement to give your land back, would you give it back?
No.
I'd have to look at it.
Why not?
Maybe if it was a buyback and I could sell my property for solid value, but I'm not just going to give up my property because of something that happened 100 years ago. That does not seem by any means fair after the amount of labor that I put into it. I hope you guys can understand. where
No,
I'm coming
totally.
from, right?
I also think it's cute to that question is, as landowners, you have a choice to give it back. I think we need to realize it's not a matter of if, but when Indigenous people will reclaim the land. And even
What does that mean, reclaim the land?
question, well, I'll get to that, but the question, the way it's put, implies that there was a choice. And for Indigenous people, there was no choice. So it's not the fact of if you'll give it back to us, we will take back
You're
the
going to come and
land.
take my land from me.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, if you want to think of it like literally or philosophically, we have proven through colonialism that we will be here as Indigenous people no matter what. So this fragile society and government that built on this land through oppression and genocide and ethnocide and rape and murder will eventually go away. and we will still be here. So it's not a matter of if, but when. And you can think of it as us literally coming.
But my question is,
house or-
how does this work? Like,
I think it.
like how are people coming and taking my land from me?
I guess I look at it in the sense that, like, and please jump in, anybody. Native Americans been here for tens of thousands of years. They've lived in a pretty balanced way, other than killing off, say, the mammoth, things like that. The thing is, they've lasted, and we've only been here, well, 200 years, say, 250 years, and we've messed it up. When you talk about climate change, when you talk about species collapse, when you talk about unsustainable economics, capitalism, when you talk about the pandemic's a good example of it. It's like we are not good stewards of the earth, and we will fail. Now, whether or not indigenous people will take over when we fail, I don't know, but I have a feeling they think they will.
We will.
Yeah, and I'm not sure. I disagree. I think we're going to continue to mess it up.
I think humanity is going to continue going that through ups and downs throughout. It doesn't matter like what the ethnicity is part of it. Civilizations rise and fall all the time.
Sure.
And going back to globalism is probably one of the negatives of like having a large globalized society is in the past, you used to have different empires, and when one empire collapsed, at least there was geographical space between that empire and the other empire from collapsing. Like that's probably one of the really big downsides of globalism, right? But it's like the idea that there's some sort of, I guess, like ethnic center on this is kind of like, it's not comporting with my head, I guess.
Why?
I view us all as humanity. I look at everybody as an individual, and like I put in my own labor into my own possessions, my property. So when I hear somebody saying that they're going to take that from me, I get a little tightened up about it.
I'm not sure that they'll take it as much as we'll all lose it by our inactions.
But like, I guess what I'm saying is, what does this process look like? How am I going to lose it? How is it going to be taken from me? This is what I'm trying to drill down right now, because I'm not getting a clear answer on this.
I don't think that we'll ever get to the point where Native Americans are going to have reconciliation totally with the colonizers. I think the colonizers, well, are going to mess it up really badly. And I think the Native Americans who have done this for tens of thousands of years will come take over the things that we messed up in this short amount of time. Probably not in ours.
Ivy and Terry, what is something you like about Western culture?
Oh my God, what did I say last time?
You can't think of anything right off the top of your head?
Not really.
Like I was saying, like sort of this technology, like my whole way of who I am, I'm a filmmaker. And so this idea of, having stuff like a camera to capture and things like that, I guess, like the art, I think that in its own self, but then also reclaiming art in that sense of like, using Western culture to reclaim this idea of us telling our own stories type of thing. Like we use that all the time with our film, sort of, is that this idea of we're not necessarily going in extracting stories, we're sort of letting people tell their own stories and having indigenous people tell their stories. So I think it's like this idea of like art.
You like technology as a piece of Western culture because it allows you to
tell my own story.
And the technology that you use gives you that capability to retell indigenous culture in your story. Mm-hmm. How about you, Terry?
Yeah, I really can't think of anything that I absolutely love. I got nothing.
Oh, come on. You were giving me more answers earlier in the week.
Oh, was I? It's been a long week. A hot shower.
You like a hot shower. A hot shower part of Western culture.
Netflix.
And Netflix. Kyle and Billy, what is something you like about indigenous culture?
I'd say the long review of who we are and what we're doing, and a little bit more patience, a little bit more slowness of life, being present
I think I'd piggyback off that. I like that slowness of life thing that I see as being pretty common. I think there's like a nice, relaxing, philosophical side to a lot of native culture that is very calming and kind of centering in a lot of ways. I think I agree with that. But to be honest, also, I don't know a whole lot about general Native American culture, and there's obviously a lot of diversity amongst Native American culture.
And I don't even know if we could, you know?
Yeah.
Because once we go over the res line, we're not res. We'll never be res. We'll be the oppressor. I don't know any way around it.
I'm happy to learn more about Native American culture or indigenous culture.
I asked this to Ivy yesterday. Terry, what do you think of when you see white people on the reservation?
Is it election season?
That's funny.
Because that's the only time a white person comes there, or
'Cause they
their
want the
law,
vote.
or their law. I think one of the first times I saw a white person was at a powwow because it was election season and they wanted the native vote.
I've seen that
and
before.
Never seen them again.
It's honestly funny to see white people at like, especially Browning's powwow. I'm like, it's so fucking fun. Last year, we were shooting with Kimberly Loring, heavy runner, and Browning has this huge parade during Indian Days and stuff, and so we were shooting, and Kimberly, we didn't, we were on a float with her, but we didn't really know what she was going to do, and so, you see all these white people, excited to watch like a parade or whatever, and Kimberly just gets up and just starts shouting the people's names who she thinks are involved with her sister's disappearance, and you just saw the faces of these white people like, should we get the fuck out of here? Like, what's going to happen type of thing? Because you see, like, the other natives, like, cussing at Kimberly, being like, fuck you, like, oh my God, what's going to happen? And it was so fascinating because it's like, you could pick them out, like, in the crowd. Like,
Wow.
I was shooting, but I could see them,
I'll give you a backstory. So Kimberly Loring, heavy runner, she's the sister of Ashley Loring, and Ashley went missing in 2017. She's MMIP, missing and murdered Indigenous person. Part of this, women and men become missing for all sorts of reasons, but in this case, there is suspicion that it happened within the tribe. How she went missing happened within the tribe. And so when she talks about her sister Kimberly at the parade calling people out, that's who she suspects.
Wow.
Yeah, we're involved. And so, like, you could see the faces of these, like, white people that are like, oh my God, like, what the hell's going on? We just wanted candy, like, holding their bags open, like, scared,
We just wanted this beautiful native experience.
Yeah, type of thing.
Only the beautiful side.
Yeah, exactly. I always say that white people only like the beautiful side of indigenous culture, nothing really else, So I had a friend who's as old as me, but we were talking like maybe a year ago. We were just walking and I started talking about boarding schools. And she was like, what are those, like English boarding schools? And she had no idea what boarding schools, and she grew up in Spokane in Montana. So there was no education of anything like that in her white education.
I don't think I learned about boarding schools until probably late college.
Yeah, I mean, boarding schools were just another form of genocide where they would kill the natives, kill the natives,
Kill the Indians, save the child.
Yeah, and so they would like assimilate these kids into these boarding schools that were like mostly Catholic, and they were subject to rape. They were subject to beatings, for speaking their language. All their hair was cut off. Their clothes were destroyed, and so it was another form of genocide.
When did this end?
I mean, it's still kind of going on, actually. There's boarding schools like that. Even a couple of years ago, my cousin, she just actually told me like a week ago, I knew this happened to her, but I wasn't necessarily aware of sort of what happened. But her grandma put her into like this, like summer school that was a boarding school for Indigenous kids. And she was like, yeah, I was pretty much part of a cult. Like they like stripped me pretty much of like everything. I wasn't able to talk about home. I wasn't able to talk about Browning, like all of this stuff. I was aware that this happened to her, but I didn't understand like the implication of what it was. And so she just kind of talked about it. And I mean, it's still kind of going on. Like there's still certain like things that...
It sounds like a re-education camp. Like that's what it sounds like to me as you're describing it, which is terrifying to me.
It is in a way. Like it's drilling this idea of what indigenous people have this whole identity and all of this stuff, and then it's like stripping all of that and then trying to implement them into like Western culture.
Terry and Ivy, will you help us start on this last piece? What would we have to agree on to be a new tribe? What could a new social contract be?
Shit, that's a big question.
It could be on a local level. It could be on like a societal level. But what is a step forward towards an agreeable social contract?
Well, I think the first step is ownership of what happened and is happening. And it's not just white people or colonizers taking ownership, but it's also us. I think there's still this and them, and we don't have to be at odds anymore. I'm not saying I want the land back to harm and activate white guilt. That's not the outcome. I want true healing to happen. Mm-hmm. In my entire life, I have gone back home, and it is exactly the same as it has been since I was born. Nothing has changed. More houses have fallen down and rotted away, but the harm is still there. I want reconciliation to be given to everyone. Equity is not a fight for me or my people. It's for everyone. It's not taking away of other people's rights or opportunities. It is lifting as we climb, when a lot of us throughout this history have just climbed. We can change the structures because we're the ones who built them. And I think that's why a lot of indigenous people are now even more integrated, whether forced into assimilation or, for me specifically, I used it as a survival skill to get ahead so that I can go back and bring and lift my people up because I have climbed. How do we go forward? And how do we figure out what taking the land back means, whether it's physically or fundamentally or politically, whether that means you get to keep your land in this generation or the next generation. And there are implications of accountability and responsibility to that land that are equivalent to what was happening pre-colonialism. It's not, we're never going to get that back. I said this on Monday, is the past has been in the past for so long that I will never know my true culture. I will never know the person I was supposed to be if I didn't have to fight every single day to have the life I have. I will never get to know what if I just lived instead of having to fight to exist. I will never own land, ever. In my entire life.
Why not?
Because it is not mine to own. Who says you get to own land? Who? No one.
We made it up.
Who says we got to own people? People did.
Yeah.
People said we own land.
I disagree with owning people. I disagree with it.
And the same concept
For the record, we'll show that.
And the same concept is on land. We don't get to say we own land. Mother Earth will be here eons after the human race dies out.
Mm-hmm. True.
We are her stewards. We are responsible. And if you want to get really philosophical, we want to be stewardships of the land and maintain and mitigate climate change so that we can selfishly continue human race. It's not I will never own this land. You will never own this land. You have a concept of ownership, but the land will still be here before you were born and after you die. After we all die.
Well, so I have a question regarding that then. Because there's this Rousseauian concept that you're throwing out, if Jean-Jacques Rousseau, a philosopher, that you're throwing out about land ownership right now. But you guys seem very, you guys very much so want to own. It seems like your argument is that you want to take land back from people, but you also don't believe in land ownership. I'm seeing a conflict there that I'm not quite able to untangle.
It's not to own the land. It's to
just make sure nobody owns land.
No, it's to have this acknowledgement of what land ownership is. Like, it's to have this idea of, do you know who roamed Belgrade before? Like, do you know the history of your land?
I do not know.
See? Exactly. Like, it's this concept of who roam these places, who are from here, the history of the land. Like, it's not like I'm going to go to Belgrade and stick a flag in your, the Blackfeet flag in your land and be like, this is mine. It's that's not what it is. And I agree with Terry.
Is this Crow land?
I agree with Terry in this way that, like, yeah, who says you own? Like, and it's not like we want the land back. That's not.
But also, who says I shouldn't own? Like, this can go two ways, right? Like, I'm not seeing a clear argument here. You can say who has the right to own land, but who doesn't have the right to own land. Like, you can throw this argument in so many various ways, and you're gonna have a hard time convincing a lot of people that they have zero right in owning property.
No.
I guess it's gonna be a difficult thing to convince.
No,
people.
I don't think it is. It's the same concept of owning Black people. There was an uprising, there was a resistance. There is no concept of owning people legally.
So, in other words, what we're saying is,
Let's just be like Oklahoma and just give the land back.
Yeah.
well, they said they give the land back, and then they're going to put all these rules, just like they've done before.
And look, guys, like, I hate the government as much as I'm a pure libertarian. I hate the government. So when there's the governmental forces getting involved in all this stuff, things get messy. Because, like, there's going to be some sort of forced aspect here. You're going to have to utilize the monopoly of force that is government to be able to take the land back, or to be able to implement these things that you're trying to create for society right now.
But I think that's a difference of how we're thinking. Like Terry said, like, we indigenous people think different. Like, there's no land ownership. It's just this idea of this is where we're from, this is where we're going to be after, everyone's gone. Like, I obviously don't want to argue with you or anything like that, but that's the reality, is that you're never going to understand that.
So you feel like, I think this is what you're saying. You were here. You've done well being here. You will outlast the people who came and killed and stole, because they can't continue doing it this way, and you will still be here.
Yeah, I think it's historically has shown that this system is not sustainable. We're in the biggest climate crisis in our entire lives, and
we're not fixing it.
Yeah, we're
new social contract.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, so it's not the exchange of ownership. It's not the exchange. I'm not going to legally force you to give me the deed to your property. It is the dissolving of this
Of the idea of property. Yeah, it's a complete deconstruction of property. I get it.
It's not.
I've read the philosophers that talk about this stuff.
Yeah, it's not. I get this plot of land. It's the taking back of the land is a concept of letting us have the opportunity to steward again. It's a fundamental different perspective, because ownership of land is not an indigenous concept.
I think it's quite obvious across America, and it's not just with indigenous peoples, it's just varying cultures across America, that there's obviously a lot of divides that are happening everywhere. And it seems like everybody kind of wants to be part of their own unique culture. Like, in the social contract concept, like, what is there any talk about things like secession, just breaking apart from the American government or anything like that, as part of the social contract? Like, does it have to be part of this American government? If people want to create these pockets, these tribes,
like reservations
or something like that, like, I'm completely for like I'm a pure libertarian. I'm not a huge fan of the government. I'm completely for people going and doing their own thing and preserving their own culture. Is that something that's in the wheelhouse of the social contract idea right now?
I think so. I am thinking back to the notion of America's a melting pot, and that idea of we all need to be melted down and molded into something new. America is pushing for a melting pot, when in reality, and this may sound silly, but we should be pushing to be a salad.
I think I agree with you.
Everyone is...
Yeah.
Every ingredient is distinct. The carrots are crunchy. The, leafy greens are leafy and green and fibrous. The dressing could be acted as the common laws or social constructs that we abide by, but everyone is distinct. Every bite is different. Everything still has its own flavor and its own thing, and they can work in harmony to make something as good as a salad is. Like, it's not this one or other. We can still have distinction and the respect to maintain that we are all in this together. We don't need assimilation and homogeny. We need respect and equity. And that's the difference, is equity realizes different people need different resources in order to be successful. That doesn't mean everyone should get everything. It means people should get the things they need in order to be successful. I think, yes, it's possible to have this distinction. And I think that's the actual outcome of tribalism, is we are all distinct. We all recognize that we are certain parts of certain things, and we can live in together and abide by specific rules.
How does that look? To me, it seems like, let's talk about strengthening sovereign nations.
Yeah.
Abiding by the treaties that we agreed to. It's like setting up truth and reconciliation so we can really talk about what happened, what kind of responsibility everybody bears, and how we can address that in a systemic way.
Yeah, and I think that's the big question, is what does it look like? And we don't know because it's never happened
ever.
Right.
And the system is designed to resist change. We want the status quo. We want to maintain comfort.
Sure.
And the people who have historically not felt comfort are now demanding that as well.
Right.
And that's where the disconnect comes from. Is
Right. Because they feel like, I think that you're right in the sense that, like, I think there's a certain thought that there's the pie is this big and it's not getting any bigger. And if you get a bigger piece of the pie, I get less of a piece of the pie.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's true.
I don't think that's true either.
I think we need a bigger pie.
I think we're constantly creating bigger pies.
It's leaning into innovation and taking risks and doing what we say we want to do and making the society we want to make into today. This promise of diversity and inclusion is always reserved for tomorrow, and it's never today. So what are we going to do today so that tomorrow it's not pushed off to the next day again?
Healing this big human family is only possible when everyone has a seat at the table. The subjugation of others and theft of their assets may not be uniquely American, but the United States' assertion that it provides respite for the world's huddled masses yearning to breathe free, that is a mecca of a melting pot for all, is, while fractionalizing everyone's oppression, tracing DNA back thousands of years to determine culpability and recompense, doesn't make sense considering the work ahead. Acknowledging generational trauma, taking ownership over what has happened and continues to happen, and decolonizing through an entire systems change may be crucial to the development of equity and respect for all. We've been brainwashed to believe that the rights and opportunities are finite, argues Bradley, but they're not. That too is a construct. And with the others that no longer serve as a collective whole, it can be rewritten. With the decolonization movement comes a regeneration of the land and its people, a rewilding of America, and a new environmental, social, and philosophical structure that more closely mirrors the range of cultures and creeds that define this nation. A huge thank you to our supporters: Susan Karstensen, Zocalo Coffee House, Whistle Pig Korean, Last Best Comedy, Hatch, Loken Productions, Ben Johnson Photography, Superfluous Industries, and Blunderbuss. A shout out to our media team: Allison Gregory, Pat Loken, Ben Johnson, Jessica Byerly, Shannon Hughes, Nathaniel Johns, Bryant Stersala, and Dylan Weber. Hey, Tay Chamberlain here. Thanks for listening and supporting I Am Interchange. We build our projects to align with the United Nations 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. Do you have an issue that's riddled by gridlock in your community? Shoot me an email at tate@iaminterchange.org. That's tate@iaminterchange.org. Remember, share airtime and don't ruin dinner.